All right. Thank you for everybody for joining us tonight. My name is John Fabricius. I am the Executive Director of Arizonans for Transparency and Accountability in Corrections, or or ATAC. Sorry. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our board. Our board begins with Deb North. We also have Sue Braga, Hannah Burke, and Charlene Schwickrath. All of us are in one way or another directly impacted by the criminal justice system. And we all have a desire and a passion to complete this work that we do for ATAC. And it is our mission to create a transparency and accountability in the Arizona Department of Corrections. Deb, Hannah, and Charlene are going to kind of go off screen for a little while because they're going to do some back-end administrative duties, which includes monitoring our Facebook Live feed for your questions, and they will be feeding those questions to us in real time. So if you have questions, please put them on the Facebook Live in the comment sections, and our team will be monitoring those and asking your questions as we go through this conversation. So thank you very much, ladies. Thank you. So it is my honor and my privilege to introduce Jimmy Jenkins from KJZZ here, also an NPR correspondent. Jimmy works tirelessly reporting on the issues relative to the Department of Corrections, as well as a number of other issues about elections and other things that are in his reporting domain. But no one that I know of has brought as much information out into the public about the Department of Corrections as Jimmy has. And we are honored and privileged to have you with us, Jimmy. Jimmy, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, of course, John. Great to be here. It's great to hear more about the work that you and the others are doing to generate more oversight and accountability for this important department that impacts so many different people. I was watching you testify today, but we didn't really get a chance to hear many of the details and understand exactly, what is this committee, what is it made up of, how will it work, what kind of abilities will it have. So I wanted to start by, we could have a conversation of you and Sue could maybe explain why is it necessary to have an independent body doing this work? Because we know that the federal government through the courts has strong oversight over the healthcare system. There are many people who seemingly work for the Department of Corrections who this is their job, right? They're supposed to be doing oversight and accountability and making connections with directly impacted people all day long, but that's not happening. So why, in your estimation, is it necessary to have an independent oversight body?
Well, it's the answer is baked into your question, Jimmy, really, quite frankly. Starting with the first part of your question where you brought up the federal courts having jurisdiction over the Arizona Department of Corrections healthcare system, that's not how it's supposed to work. That's because there is a class action lawsuit that the Arizona Department of Corrections was sure to lose, and entered into a settlement agreement allowing the court, the federal United States District Court, to maintain jurisdiction over the implementation of that settlement agreement. That's not how our system works. Arizona is supposed to be running our healthcare system. The state of Arizona government is supposed to be doing that. And so it's important to understand that the feds aren't supposed to have jurisdiction over any part of the Arizona Department of Corrections. We live in a republic and we live in a federalist federal system, and so that's not the way it's supposed to be. That's because of the lawsuit. Secondly, there is a number of instances and problems and systemic impediments inside the hierarchical structure of the Arizona Department of Corrections that manifest in the inability for issues to be raised and dealt with appropriately. And that was addressed that was addressed in the report that was done by the two Supreme Court justices that Governor Doug Ducey appointed to investigate the Lewis Locke event. One of the main issues that they brought forward was the fact that there is a system in place that impeded and didn't want issues to come up, because people at mid and higher level ranks, their careers were going to be in jeopardy because of these problems that were happening at the units and some of these things. And so they weren't passing the information on to their supervisors, and that was manifesting in a number of problems with that system as well. So it's imperative that we have an outside entity looking at this that understands what to look at, and is not colored by pecuniary or having financial interests or having an interest that would be relative to their own career looking at this department. One last thing I'll say about that is that, we invented prisons as we know them here in the United States. This prison system that we have in the United States began in Pennsylvania about the time of the Constitutional Convention, meaning before we had the Constitution signed in Philadelphia. They made the first prisons. And that prison, when the founding fathers of Pennsylvania, which we're talking about people like Benjamin Franklin and some of the actual original founding fathers of our country, when they created that first prison, the first thing that they did was create an external independent oversight, because what they knew 240 years ago is what we see today. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And when you talk about a system where the government strips the liberty of individuals and puts them inside of an area and makes them wards of the state, they have a legal, moral, and ethical obligation to care for those people. But if they're the ones that are also in charge of all the information and in charge of all the access and everything else inside those prisons, then it's a recipe for disaster. And we see that now in our Arizona Department of Corrections, what happens when you don't have that external independent oversight.
So could you give us an example of maybe a time when you first realized, when you were at Perryville, that, wow, no one's really watching the show here. Like maybe, when did you first start to have inclinations, or was there an example that you could share with us when you realized that, like, the people who are supposed to be watching over procedures, who are supposed to be providing accountability, weren't really doing the job, weren't really meeting the requirements to keep everyone safe and secure and for it to be an effective system?
Sue, you're on mute.
Unmute yourself.
I would say right when I got there at reception and assessment, which they call R&A, I was observing how they were operating and doing their jobs, and the inconsistency was incredible to me as far as what they were doing. Now, mind you, R&A also includes girls there was recidivism involved, and others were, first time. So it was a combination of multiple issues going into multiple directions: minimum, medium, closed, etc. So during the orientation portion, there was more focused on the PREA situation, making sure that everybody saw the film more than they were concerned about actual incidences. So right from the get-go, but that was because my background is political science and public affairs and government issues. So going into it was eye-opening, because in the past I had not really paid attention to the Department of Corrections, and I was also told by a friend who knew the government affairs director for DOC at the time, and he told her, oh, no problems, they work with their CO3s, they guide them through their whole incarceration to make sure they're meeting their goals, and no. So who's watching over to see that we as inmates had opportunities, because that was another thing that she was told. They had great medical, because some of these ladies had never seen a doctor, so they were finally going to get to see a doctor. So I was told that. And of course, that proved to be totally false, as you know by the lawsuit. So I spent my incarcerated years really focused on what was going on, and kept remarking every time somebody said something to me, my comeback was, wow, if taxpayers only knew how their money was misspent, or how it just never ceased to amaze me how broken this system was. So yeah, it was every day, Jimmy, all the way through. I was only in there for 3 years, but because I was so focused on all these incidental situations, and yet I could see consistency within the situations, but no consistency with resolution. So then that's when I was like, we need oversight. Even in there, I kept saying we need oversight. So we need oversight, and then the ombuds on top of it, because you don't have any resources. Again, and I'm sure John's going to get into this with the grievance, with the availability to be able to see a CO3. As far as where you have to go. So, yeah, it's a punitive system, and it's inconsistent on so many levels.
Before we get into the actual structure of the committee and the ombudsman, I think maybe that's a good a way to talk about what we think, or what you have told me you think is wrong with the grievance process. I can certainly say I think there's a lot wrong with the grievance process, just because I've read so many grievances from people that have gone nowhere, and they're just so heartbreaking for the most basic healthcare needs, for people just trying to acquire their own safety and security while they do their time. And so just for me as an outsider, reading these things and then hearing from the person months, years later, and saying, wow, this didn't go anywhere, I have nowhere else to turn. It does seem to me like the grievance process doesn't work. But maybe, John, can you give us just a little more information about the shortcomings of the grievance process, and especially let people know who might not know, how extensive a process you have to go through before you even get any sort of response?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So there's a number of things wrong with the grievance system. Just real quickly, the grievance system, it's administrative remedies, that's been around for a long time in a lot of areas, especially relative to government work and that type of thing. It was applied to both the federal and state prisons in 1994 as a mandatory element in a thing called the Prison Litigation Reform Act of 1994, passed the United States Congress. Before anybody that's incarcerated in any jail or prison can raise a lawsuit or a civil rights claim or anything like that relative to their conditions of confinement, we're not talking about criminal conviction, but conditions of confinement, everything to do with the aspects of being in jail or prison, before they can take that to a court, they have to exhaust this administrative remedy process or grievance process, and the state gets to set that grievance process up. And the courts have held, repeatedly, the United States Supreme Court has held that even if the grievance system doesn't lead to results, and even if the system is virtually impossible to complete, it doesn't matter, that an inmate is still required to exhaust those available remedies. So that puts an enormous burden on somebody that's trying to raise an issue. And that all comes back to ATAC. I mean, everybody's probably heard ATAC and what happened in ATAC in 1972, I think it was 1972 or 71, where they had a prison riot there, and people were kidnapped, and they had to send the National Guard in, and all of it came back to the fact that the inmates did not have a viable system to raise legitimate issues about their conditions of confinement. And so here we are, some 50 years later, and we're still in a situation where there's now this pro forma structure in place, but there's still nobody on the other side of these papers in many instances. It's like having a telephone with nobody that answers it. And so it starts with your access. You have to be able to access a specific set of forms. They have specific forms, and only these forms can be used in the Department of Corrections to raise a grievance. And the problem is to access those forms, you oftentimes have to visit offices of the DOC personnel who you might very well be the subject of your grievance, or they're narrowly open, they're not open or available to inmates. Inmates are required to be in locations. They have to work, they have to turn up for their meals, they have to be in their housing assignments. So just getting to the form in and of itself is a sometimes arduous battle just to get the form. And then you go and you get the form, and instead of it being a 2-page form that's supposed to, like a carbon copy type form, it'll be a photocopy of the front sheet. And so you fill out this form with your complaint on it that you have to have a receipt of, and you give it to the person who receives it, which is called a correctional officer 3, and there's no copy. So when you turn in this grievance, there's no copy. You walk away without any type of physical copy that you turned it in. Then there's this structure in place. There's a timeline, and it's a strictly enforced timeline that you have to file a grievance. You have 5 days from an event happening to file a grievance, but then the staff has a certain amount of time to answer it. But if the staff member doesn't answer it, and they often don't, then you have to prove at the next step that you did file this earlier stepped grievance. And without any receipts, you can't do that. So I could go into further steps too, the fact that you can file that, and if you get the forms and you meet the timelines and you get it to the person that's supposed to do it, and you know, in the 20 or 30 or 40% of the time that they actually answer it, they come back and answer it, they deny you all the way up. And so this whole process is a 150-day process. 150 days, so 6 months. So you have a problem today, you're not going to get a final resolution about it under the best circumstances that are almost impossible to navigate until 6 months from now. So what does that do for you right now when you're having a problem, especially if you're suffering a medical issue, or especially if you're suffering from a property loss, or you're suffering your inability to, you know, access the phones or whatever it is? You're in for a 6-month battle if you can make it. And quite frankly, there's a lot of people, the last step is that the process is in a policy, and a policy is difficult to understand. It's hard to read. It takes somebody that's got a pretty high education to be able to navigate that and explain to somebody. And so people just give up on this process. And so problems go unresolved. Anger comes. There's all kinds of problems that manifest from this. It's a horrible process.
Sure. And just all because people aren't being heard, their concerns aren't being addressed.
Yeah.
Hannah tells us that a lot of folks are sharing their experiences, their own poor experiences with the grievance system, as well as talking about concerns of retaliation. I'm sure that's not new to anyone. You know, anytime you make a peep or write an email or tell your loved one that you didn't get the right meal, it seems like people are constantly retaliated against in one way or another. So it's another impediment to the grievance process. So
Absolutely.
Knowing that there are all those shortcomings, what have you proposed here? What is the framework of this committee that would hopefully bridge the divide between incarcerated people and getting their complaints resolved, as well as bridging the divide between the loved ones of incarcerated people and actually getting some answers and some action? Tell us how this would actually play out.
Sure, absolutely. So, and again, I want to reiterate kind of what you just said there too, which is that we want to hear your comments. This is a conversation. So if you have a question or comment, please put it in our Facebook comments page. It is being monitored. And as Jimmy just showed, it's being transmitted to us. Okay, so what did we put in place here? So there is ombuds models, there's prison oversight models that have been in effect around the country. Like I referred to earlier, the Pennsylvania system has been in place for a long time, and that's a good system. But there are successes and failures all across the country for oversight. And so when I started looking at this, I mean, just like Sue had said, I started looking at this because I do have some legal training in my background. I have a paralegal degree, and I did a lot of legal work while I was in there. And helping people navigate that grievance system, that type of thing. So you start thinking about what oversight means, and you start evaluate it in the context of the politics of the state that you're in. Meaning literally the state we're in, Arizona, and you have to look at the political landscape and you have to understand what that means and look at the structures that you can put in place. So you look at the best practices, you look at that data, what are the best practices for an oversight? Then you have to take that and you have to apply it to this particular environment, because the way that the prison system operates in Arizona is not the same as it operates in, say, Texas or Ohio or New York City or something along those lines. So you have to take what those best practices and look at it. So what we had come up with originally in a proposal that was written by a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, Travis Hyland, and I, in early 2019, was we'd come up with a system where we weren't just going to put like a citizens oversight committee in place, and we weren't going to just put an ombuds in place, which is primarily the two models that have been around the country. I was very much adamant about making sure that this was going to be a hybrid model, that there was going to be both a committee and an ombuds, and the other part of that is that those are kind of attached to two different parts of our government. As we all know from basic civics class, we have three elements of our government. We have the judicial, which is the courts. We have the legislative, which is the lawmakers, the representatives and congressmen, legislators, and then we have the executive, which is the governor. The Department of Corrections is an executive agency, so DOC comes under the governor. It's part of his a portfolio of agencies, his or her. And so my big concern was making sure that we had something that was working with the executive, but also making sure that it was working with the legislative. And so this model legislation has taken that form. The House Bill 2167 that we voted on, or that was voted on today, has this model. Other models that have come up with Representative Diego Rodriguez has this model. And it's one where there's the citizens-led oversight in the legislature committee, and there's the ombuds that's out there that works with the governor. The beautiful thing about this ombuds model that's in this legislation is that it's completely independent. It's not an office of the executive. It's independent, but it works with the governor about reporting issues that are going on inside the Department of Corrections. So the primary structure is that there is a citizens-involved legislative committee that has lawmakers on it from both parties. It has experts on it like medical doctors, mental health professionals. It has directly impacted people, meaning that people that have been in the Department of Corrections, a man and a woman that have both been in the Department of Corrections for at least 3 years. Also, it has somebody that's a family member, another citizen member that's a family member of somebody that's been in the Department of Corrections. It allows for the men and women that work in the Department of Corrections to have a voice on that committee as well. They're in a non-voting status, but they are a member of that committee. So you have the voices of lawmakers, you have the voices of the directly impacted, you have the voices of experts, and you have the voices of the labor that goes to work, the 10,000 people that go to work in the Department of Corrections every day in this structure. And then you have the ombuds, and the ombuds person is the one that's going to do the thrust of the work.
Who selects the committee, and then who selects the ombudsman under the laws or under the bill as it's written?
Yeah, so the members of the committee have to meet a number of requirements. There's, again, protections in there. We don't want anybody that has any financial interest, that has basically a conflict of interest to be on this committee. So the team that wrote all of the legislation that's out there, including House Bill 2167, were very careful to ensure that those people that are nominated have to meet these particular criteria. We want regular people on this committee who have these experiences, whether being directly impacted by being in there or that have a loved one that's in there. The lawmakers, so it's for the committee on the lawmaker side, it's one member from the House that is from the majority party. So that would be, right now, that would be a Republican member from the House that the Speaker of the House gets to select. The minority leader gets to select a member from the House, and then the Speaker of the President of the Senate and the minority leader in the Senate also get to select one member. So there's one from each party. Two members from each part of the legislation, one from each party, selected by their own leadership to go on to that committee. So the four members, the four lawmakers. The citizens will be, like I said, they have to meet a bunch of criteria. Ultimately, they will be nominated and then selected by the governor. But the protections that are in place there is that they have to meet all these criteria to even be successfully nominated. And that's where we protect those positions. And then ultimately, the committee is the ones who will come together, and the committee is vested with the power to select the ombuds. And again, there's a list of criteria that the ombuds has to meet in order to be selected by the committee and then put in place by the governor, because it is ultimately because we're talking about elements of government, there has to be some sort of government attachment on that.
Sure. Okay, but there we go. So we had a question from Tammy Gardner, who says, ombudsman not always effective. She cites DCS as an instance where maybe this was not a very effective role in her experience. So I think maybe that's the answer, though, is you're saying that the committee would be the ones who would hold this ombudsman accountable and make sure that they're following through with their duties and not beholden to the governor, even though obviously a lot of these people still have connections to the governor. There's going to be some relationship there, but it sounds like to me you're saying that the committee is the key here to holding the ombudsman accountable. And if you have all those people who are members of the community, I mean, they're going to have eyes and ears out there, and they're going to be involved, right?
Absolutely. That's 100% correct. The committee is charged with the whole time on making sure that the ombuds is working and is working effectively. And there are a number of elements inside this bill that make sure that the selection process gets us the best potentials to be appointed the ombuds, but then there's also protections in there for that, how the ombuds can be removed. There's term limitations in there, so people don't go into this position and sit forever. There's term limitations on the committee itself, so people don't sit there forever for long periods of time and create little fiefdoms and silo off and that type of thing. All of these things were considered. All of these political machinations or political issues were considered. All of these performance issues were considered in advance, and there is built-in safety valves for all of that.
Okay. I want to talk about how this could be potentially beneficial for people who have loved ones who are incarcerated right now, how it can be utilized by people who are currently incarcerated. And Sue, I wanted you to give us an example of, you've been so instrumental in helping me understand conditions that are going on inside the prisons. And in many ways, people like you are the only way now that the public learns about what is really going on, because you're able to communicate with the women that you are friends with and are caring for, and you're able to kind of anonymously pass some of that information on to me sometimes, other press, and that's how it kind of leaks out into the world. And then maybe if it's crazy enough story, something would actually happen. So, I mean, Sue, can you tell us how difficult it is to get information out right now? And then John, can you talk about how, in a perfect world under the system, how it would be a much more, reasonable way to blow the whistle to communicate your concerns? I mean, Sue, can you just give us an example of how tough it is just even tell someone that like the water was out this weekend or something is kind of a risk, right?
Right. Evidently, there was a water pipe break out at Perryville. And then I got notified because nobody believes it to be the truth as to the cause of all of a sudden there's no access to water. And porta johns are brought in, and those kinds of issues that come up suddenly. In real time, email has helped get it to us, but I have, and I'm always told this, and I do know that this for a fact, this does happen, that an admin gets very upset and starts talking about takeaways. If you continue to talk, even to your family, let alone media. And I think DOC pulled the plug on media talking about the things that are going wrong in there. Some of the things that have happened out at Hickman's, those were major issues, probably, and I think they still are to some degree. There's always something that's going on, but then I get pushback at times because of concern of retaliation. And that is a constant concern and a constant threat that is hanging over the women and then also their families. That sometimes they're afraid to bring things forward. I know that I was recently told via email that the COVID situation has reared its head again, and some of the girls have symptoms, feel sick, but are afraid to say anything. And it's because they know the quarantine conditions and they're concerned about treatment. So this again, it should be out there. Where are the vaccines? Where is the testing? This whole COVID thing has been a nightmare. And unless we're able to get in and drill down, even though DOC puts it on the dashboard, I wouldn't trust those numbers. So that's a couple of examples of things that we know where an independent oversight or an ombuds can walk in the door without notification and go, what the heck is going on?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So,
go ahead. I'm sorry, Jimmy. Go ahead.
So, John, describe to us then, John, like how would a family member on the outside reach out in a safe and way that would get some sort of reaction, and how would an incarcerated person reach out to this committee?
Sure. There's a system, and it's spelled out very in detail in this bill, with protections. Retaliation, whether real or perceived, because it's used, there is real retaliation, and there's no doubt about it. But the large majority of it is what really a psychological operation is what they would call it in the military, right? A psyop. Because the retaliation, they win every time somebody is afraid, whether it's an inmate or it's a staff member, and we need to talk about that as well. The whistleblowers that have come forward from staff. Every time somebody comes forward, watch a movie, watch Shawshank Redemption, or watch Brubaker, or watch any of these prison movies. The one thing that they almost consistently get right is how reactive administration in these prisons are. They do not want to be criticized. Again, I will cite that report from the two justices that went in and looked at the Lewis Locke issue. They specified this, saying that wardens and that level did not want to be criticized and did not want to be criticized because of their own career advancement, so they didn't pass information up the food chain. So they certainly don't want to hear it from somebody below them. It's not in their best interest to hear these issues and to move forward on it. So again, staff are retaliated. Inmates are retaliated. That does happen, but in a much larger issue, it's the psychological fear of retaliation that allows this system to go on. And so with that, we worked very hard. And this is, again, great credit to the team that wrote HB 2167. great credit to that team that they listened quite a bit to what we had to say about this issue in particular. There is an element in there about using the administrative remedy process, the grievance process, to raise an issue for an inmate. So if an inmate wants to raise an issue right now as the structure is set, they have to try to resolve this issue through the inmate grievance system. But we built in a number of protections and pointed out all of those failures that I talked about and all of the experiences that you have impeding you from access on the inmate grievance system. So now that there's a bunch of safety valves built in, that if an inmate is impeded in any way, they can still take their issue to the ombuds. But moreover, what's important is family members have direct access to the ombudsman. And this will all be in the domain of the ombudsman, not necessarily the committee. The ombudsman is the one who will do all of this type of yeoman's work, really. But there is direct access for family members, for loved ones, for friends, for inmates, for staff. Everybody has access to the ombuds in a private, confidential, and secured manner. And we worked really hard on that element. Right now there's a system in place in the Department of Corrections called the legal mail system, where legal mail from a court or from an attorney is treated differently from all of the rest of the mail. It's called privileged mail. It's also for lawmakers. So if a legislator writes you or whatever, that's privileged mail. That mail is handled differently than all the other mail, which is read, which is inspected, all that kind of stuff. Any time of legal mail, the officer security team is not allowed to read that mail. They have to call the inmate to an area, a legal mail call. The inmate will arrive there. They have to open the letter in front of the inmate. They cannot read the content of the letter, but they can look inside the envelope and make sure there's not contraband in there. So, because quite frankly, that has been a source of contraband in the past. So there's a protected system to receive information, but moreover, there's a protected system there in place to send out information. If I send a letter to my attorney or I send it to a lawmaker, that system is also in place where I can write my letter, I can take it up to the legal mail area, I show them that I'm not putting contraband in the envelope, they never get to read the letter itself, I put the letter in the envelope, I seal it, it goes in the United States mail, it gets delivered. Moreover, there's tracking on all of that. They track the incoming and outgoing legal mail system. We put the ombuds process in that system. It's protected. There's protected forms and protected envelopes specifically for ombuds forms in this legislation. Additionally, there is a confidential computer system that will be put in units to report to the ombuds, where an inmate will be able to access a computer and make a complaint or cite an issue with the ombuds office that is also protected and does not have security looking at it.
Okay.
And then lastly is the family and the other people are be able to access them directly.
Okay, so just a lot more avenues to bring up your concerns, pass along your concerns from your loved ones, hopefully not get them thrown into a situation over it just because you brought it up.
Right. Right.
I wanted to ask Sue, because I want to ask about another provision of all this. Sue, can you give us an example of when you saw like an inspection or lawmakers come through or something, and you just knew that they had like a huge heads up? Because I have personally asked for inspection reports about the kitchen. They always come back glowing. But, then I talk to the kitchen workers and they say, well, there were roaches in here just 2 days ago. They came in, they fumigated the place, they just painted, they're putting up new curtains. It seems to me like there is a problem with execution of inspections and actual accountability. Is that something that you witnessed?
Oh gosh, yeah. And when you said that, what immediately came to my mind was about the kitchen, where the boxes of frozen foods that we got that would say not for human consumption. And that story. But anyway, yes.
Anyone out there has that label? Email it.
Yeah, we talked about that. When I initially got there, the girls would tell me, oh, there was mold all over in certain areas, especially in the showers and things like that. And then I'd see maintenance coming in with spray paint. And so, because there was an audit coming. And we were always drilled about getting ready for an audit or getting ready for an inspection. And when ACLU would come in to do the monitoring of the healthcare, there was always some kind of, they knew that ACLU was coming in to monitor. Now, when I was at Pedro, that at the time was the maternity yard. So they would that would be a time where they would spend the time talking with the women. But prior to that, there was always prep done prior to, and it was porters having to go through and clean up after COs and things like that, and to make it glossed over, as far as what you would visually see. So yes.
Okay. So
does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes. And so knowing that, John, what are you proposing? What kind of powers would the Ombudsman have to try and get around that, this preparation time, the tip-offs, the sweeping everything under the rug before the inspectors show up?
So the Ombuds is mandated in this legislation to visit a number of facilities each year. So not only is there the impetus through complaints, but the Ombuds is supposed to just go visit random facilities at random times, and they can't be the same facilities over and over again. Right. So we thought about that as well. So we have them going to these facilities by mandate. Moreover, they get to go out there to go inspect issues that are being reported. Additionally, the committee itself is mandated to go and inspect facilities biannually, and it can't be the same facility. So you have both the committee going to when we talk about facilities, we're talking about complexes, and complexes will have multiple units in them. So the committee has to go to at least 2 complexes a year. The Ombuds, I can't remember what the number is off the top of my head, but the Ombuds has to go to a number of them. I think it's 6 a year, at least 6 a year, maybe more. To go and visit these places independent of investigating issues. But what's built into that for both the committee and especially for the Ombuds is they have a thing called director's level access, meaning that they get to walk in without being announced, they get to ingress the facility, and they get to walk, they have director's level, meaning that they have the same ingress access and egress as the director of the Department of Corrections. Other places called it golden key access. So they will be able to go. There's provisions in there that allow the Ombuds to speak to staff confidentially, speak to inmates confidentially, be able to record testimony and conversations. There is the ability to compel testimony. There's all kinds of elements in there in this legislation that allow for all of these things, but they have full ingress and egress because that is the number one problem. Anytime, in my experience, like Sue had said, the 15 years I was in there, I was personally tasked to get ready, to make the way ready for, there was a reporter from the Arizona Republic that used to come in and was doing a big piece on them, series on them in the 2010 through 2012. And they would have us, they knew exactly when he was coming, the short period of time that they granted him to be on the facility, and they knew a week in advance exactly every step that they would take on a unit and where they would go, and those steps were pristinely kept, were pristinely maintained, where they were going to go and what they were going to see. It was all just a fantasy and a mirage and a dog and pony show, really. And so it had nothing to do with the reality of the day-to-day. So we have made sure that that is not going to be the reality with the Ombuds or the committee in this legislation.
So potentially you're empowering someone here who would just have the authority to just show up at Lewis one day and say, you know, I want to take me to this unit, I want to see, I've heard about this because I heard from this person and I want to go check it out. And technically they ought to be able to go waltz in there and do that.
Not even during business hours. Maybe they want to show up at 1 o'clock in the morning and just see what's going on with the overnight shift. that type of thing, or
that
all
would
of
be
that.
really incredible and quite a change from the way it works now. I wanted to pivot to a couple of questions here from viewers. Andy Hall asks, how much staff will the ombudsperson have? Can you just, and we have a lot of questions to get to, John, so can you quickly just tell us what's that staffing going to look like if the bill is successful?
Okay, so the appropriation, we have to look at that as the appropriation. We've asked for $1.5 million. The Washington State, which is the ombuds that we have in this legislation, is primarily based off the model that's in place right now in Washington State. Washington State has a much smaller prison population, and they're operating at $1.2 million right now. We think $1.5 million is enough. But we haven't specified the number of staff, but we have empowered the ombuds to hire staff, permanent staff, part-time staff, and to accept volunteers, and all of them would have that golden key access or director level access.
Okay. We heard from someone who wants to know, as a former inmate, I'm definitely interested. How can I get on the committee? I would say once this gets up and running, how would someone go about applying who's formerly incarcerated? That's
exactly right. So that process, right now we're creating the structure for that process. The way that I vision it is that there will be, because there are specific mandates that you have to meet, I think that the final bill is going to say that you had to at least spend 3 years incarcerated in the Department of Corrections, and that you have to have been absolutely discharged from the Department of Corrections for obvious reasons, right? If you can go right back to prison because you're on parole, then that makes you subject to, chicanery, quite frankly. So at least 3 years in the Department of Corrections and absolutely discharged. And then as long as it's within, if that's occurred within 5 years of the time when you're going to apply, as long as you meet those criteria, you'll be in a pool of people that will be suggested for the appointments of those positions. So and so we've worked out a couple of different methodologies on that. It's a little early to say what the exact process will be because we're still doing the structural part of it. We're going to get down into the weeds once we get this actually implemented in law.
Jimmy, I just want to add, when we talk about if people want to volunteer, we need help getting this bill passed. Yeah. So if anybody wants to participate in helping get this thing through the legislature, I'm talking the rest of the committees in the House floor, the Senate side, please post up your name, your physical address, so we can send you your legislators, so that you can track with your legislators how to get this bill passed.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. We need that. We need as many people on the ground as we can get right now,
exactly,
all over the state.
Okay, we still have a few questions just related to, I think the general point is just, how is this ombudsperson going to be held accountable? I know we've kind of addressed that with the committee, but people seem to be concerned based on the comments. So can you just talk again about, how you envision? I mean, again, I can understand the concerns. If the governor appoints some of these people, then they appoint the ombudsman. Maybe you're going to get an ombudsman who's not going to, want to make any trouble, so to speak. So what will you be? How about this? What will you be looking for in an ombudsman to try and prevent that conflict of interest?
Yeah, so absolutely. They cannot have any financial ties to the Department of Corrections in any way, shape, or form. They cannot be a former employee of the Department of Corrections or have worked there for the last 10 years. I think the ombuds can't have worked there at all. I'd have to look at that again. I can follow up on that after the fact. They have to be of good moral character and be known for that. They have to have experience in this work. They have to have a body of experience in this work. It's just like when you hire a mechanic, right? You're not going to just hire somebody. You're going to hire somebody that's been a mechanic and has that experience. So we're going to be looking at, the committee will be looking at that, those levels. That's all enumerated in the bill. There's a number of elements that they have to meet and mandates, and there has to be separation. So we're talking about people that are experts in criminology, in prison operations, the law, any of those fields, and have experience with oversight in ombuds and are of good moral character and have good standing in that position, in those positions. And then again, like as I said earlier, then they're still always under the purview of the committee, which includes the former incarcerated, includes experts, includes lawmakers, are always going to be watching the ombuds to make sure that they are meeting the mandates of that position.
It's going to be drilled down the same as any kind of HR position, with performance evals and all kinds of things that meet those measures. There will be performance goals and measures tacked onto this.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Looks like I think we're going till 7:15, correct?
Yes.
So we have about 25 minutes left. If people still want to get their questions in, we're monitoring that and we'd be happy to ask those to John and Sue. Sue, I wanted to ask you if this were up and running right now, because we heard from Representative Blackman today. He said he felt that not enough of a reform conversation had been centered around incarcerated women. So can you, going with that attitude, can you give us an example of something that, if you had the staff and the time and, the resources, what is something that you think should be researched or investigated at Perryville right now? In other words, like what is something that you feel like this committee and the ombudsman could take action on at Perryville right now, like a general category or something specific?
Well, healthcare is just a priority on everybody's minds at Perryville. And you have the situation too with the women that are pregnant. And you can't even find the word pregnant or maternity in the policy. And I frankly they need a separate book for women's, a separate policy book for women. The whole thing, I think what is getting wrapped up in the bill that was heard today, 2261, is a start. Again, the whole issue again with visitation, parental rights, the men, the CO men, and their access to the women and the way that they talk to the women, they need to go through some kind of training. There needs to be specialized training. So many of the women that I met, it was heartbreaking, and yet I was so angry too, especially with the way that they were talked down to. You got a self-confidence, self-worth issue to begin with. So the training is awful as far as working with the women goes. Even some of the women CEOs have military backgrounds. So I mean, let's face it, the prisons are modeled, use a military model. And so, this again is this adhering to this stuff that it's fine if you choose to join the military, but when you're going to prison, that's not a choice. And this is supposed to be a time for rehab and getting ready for reentry. So everything in my head is an issue. From the way they're talked to, from the way we were, it just nothing made sense. It was because women are different. Let's face it. I know everybody thinks it's supposed to be the same game, but it's not. They're separate needs and separate wants, and it just is not being directed. And I think with the oversight, which is something that I was constantly saying even while I was in there, would be helpful in ensuring that these issues, especially with the healthcare, and I know about with the lawsuit, and I know that it's so much with the healthcare issue. Things have got to get settled with that. But the other pieces, like I said, is just the day-to-day living, making sure that they have access to hygiene products, making sure meals are appropriate, making sure that they're able to have contact with their families, with their children. It's totally different. If you've got a 7-year-old and that 7-year-old wants to sit on your lap, they should be allowed to. And there's a rule: if they're over 7, they can't sit on mom's lap. So, I mean, there's issues all the way around.
Yeah, but I think what I'm hearing you say, and what I know you've told me in the past, is that there just needs to be a review of guidelines and just make sure that they're geared toward the appropriate population. Like you pointed out to me several instances where rules for the men's prison were obviously just copied and pasted to apply to the women, when in some cases it just doesn't work. So, yeah, maybe in this instance you'd have more people paying attention to something like that. We have a question from Joe Watson, who's no stranger to attempting to shepherd legislative efforts and reform efforts through the legislature. Joe Watson, longtime veteran of this kind of work. He asks, what should the folks do the rest of this session to ensure the passage of this bill? So, and that's a good point. So today, John was just, at least your bill was heard in committee and passed out of committee. That's a big step, right? But
Yep.
Maybe you can tell us what the next step is, and then this will bring an opportunity for you to tell people what they can do to support your cause.
Yeah, so let's talk about this bill, and let's talk about any legislation, because there is a lot of confusion amongst loved ones and people incarcerated on what this process is at. And thank you, Joe, for asking this question, because it's a very important question. Legislative process, it's complicated, it's difficult, and there's a lot of steps, and it can get really heart-wrenching at times, because if you're down here in the weeds and you're looking at how the sausage is made, they say don't go look and watch how the sausage is made. I mean, it can really play on you when you have a vested interest, when you have an emotional interest in the outcome. So let's talk about the process real quick. First of all, the process today with the House Bill 2167, I believe that there may be some other oversight legislation coming up, but House Bill 2167 passed the first committee. So there's two houses in our legislature. There is the House of Representatives and there is the Senate. And inside that, they have committees. And every bill has to come up through a committee, right? So the bill that came up today was sponsored by Representative Walt Blackman from Legislative District 6 up in Snowflake. And it's his bill. He is the chairman of the Criminal Justice Reform Committee. He called his bill. There was public testimony taken on it. I testified, others testified on it. It was voted on, and it passed out of that committee on a 9-0 unanimous vote, meaning that all the Republicans and all the Democrats on that committee voted in favor of that bill. It now moves from that committee, and it's going to move into the Appropriations Committee. And there, it has to be called by the chair, and then it has to be testimony has to be received, and then the members of the Appropriations Committee have to vote on it, because there is an appropriation in this bill of $1.5 million. After that committee, if and when that happens, then it's got to go to a thing called the Rules Committee. Again, it has to be called by the chair, and it has to be voted on by the members of that committee and pass by a majority vote. So there's three, because of this type of bill, there's three committees that it has to pass, and that's before it gets to the floor where all of the representatives get to vote on it. But that's only half the battle. That's actually only a third of the battle. Then it goes from the House over to the Senate side, and that whole process plays out again. It's got to get called in one of the committees over in the Senate, which will be the Judiciary Committee. Then it's got to go through Appropriations and Rules over there. And once that's done, then the Senate can vote on it. So there is multiple steps in this process just at the legislative level. Once that it gets voted on, if it passes all those committees and the floor vote in the House, and then all the committees in the Senate and the floor vote in the Senate, then it's got to go to the governor's office, and the governor has to sign it. And so that gives us opportunity at every step of this process to come and advocate for that bill. And this goes back to what Sue was saying, which is that we need boots on the ground, we need voices on the phone, we need fingers on the keyboards to get our lawmakers to understand the impact of this legislation, how it impacts your life, and how it impacts the life of your loved ones, and how it impacts just John Q. Citizen out there in the state who may not have any connection to the Department of Corrections, but is paying $1.3 billion for a failing agency, an agency that is failing every metric, including its most primary metric, which is keeping people in a certain area. We just had an escape last week. It's failing every mission. And so this is affecting every man, woman, and child in our state. Moreover, we pay $1.3 billion for this agency. That is money that is not going to educate our children, is not going to create access to healthcare, is not going to build infrastructure in our state, is not going for any number of other programs, because we're paying an enormous amount of money. Let me give you one little fact on that. Just since 2017, in the last 4 years, the appropriations for this department has gone up 19%. That's $200 million plus, $220 million extra we've thrown at the Arizona Department of Corrections. And
which way is the population going, John? I can't remember.
The population decreased 10%.
Oh, that's right.
So the population went from 42,000 and is at 37,900 right now. At the same time, the appropriation increased at 19,000. So what does that mean? That means that we're paying more for less and getting worse results out of the Department of Corrections right now. So this affects everybody. There's nobody in the state of Arizona that is not adversely affected by this agency and its failing mission. So we need everybody on the phones. We need everybody reaching out to their lawmakers. We need everybody sending these emails. We need boots on the ground, fingers on the keyboards, voices on the phones, getting this passed in all of those different steps that we talked about.
So obviously a challenging road ahead, as it would be for any legislation. But
Sure.
I wondered if you all noticed the same thing today when I was watching the committee meeting. I remember in years past, there was a lot more discussion about well, maybe, why are we even talking about the Department of Corrections? Don't they have a director? Why are we even, why do they need oversight? Today, as you know, it was unanimously passed. But, even with the comments from both sides of the aisle, it does seem like there's some sort of bipartisan support for greater oversight of this department. I mean, John and Sue, you all are in conversations with movers and shakers and lawmakers. Is that the sentiment that you're getting as well? That maybe after several years, after people like Joe Watson, AFSC, ACLU, ATAC, START, after several years now, are you getting the feeling that there is more buy-in and bipartisan buy-in?
I am. In fact, I spoke with a friend of mine who's a lobbyist, but not anything related to criminal justice reform. She mostly does education and healthcare. And she even commented to me how she has never seen so many criminal justice reform bills, bipartisan support, as she's seen this year. So that says something when people that are not even involved with the criminal justice domain are recognizing what's going on. And I don't think there was the discussion today is because there's back channel discussion among the caucuses that recognize, and it is truly a bipartisan. When you've got Right on Crime supporting these bills as well, that the tide is turning.
Right. And I'd like to mention Right on Crime, and FAM was there testifying as well. So
Right. Kurt Altman from Right on Crime.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I've heard that directly from lawmakers from both sides of the aisle that I've talked to have said the same thing. This is a nonpartisan issue. This is a tagline for our organization. This is a nonpartisan issue that it requires a bipartisan solution. And the thing about that tagline is that I'm getting said that tagline from lawmakers down there. Everybody is fed up with the Department of Corrections. And let's talk about that, because this goes into a question I have for you, Jimmy. Here we had 52 years of this Department of Corrections, right? It and I were born the same year, 1968, right? So we're both 52 years old, me and the DOC. So for 52 years, this organization, this agency has been operating in the wind without anybody outside of it looking down into it other than the fourth estate, the press. Inmates are called liars. If their mouth's moving, then they must be lying. They're done that. Family members are just being manipulated by their loved ones, those type of things. So the only thing that was ever happening was the press. Like I said, 2010, there was a reporter that was doing a big series on them. But here we have all these problems, and the chickens are coming home to roost. The can's been kicked down the road for 52 years on oversight. The problems are now coming one after another, after another, after another. We've expanded our Department of Corrections. We put everybody we could in prison, and the prison wasn't ready for all that. The infrastructure is decaying. All these things are happening. And so we had after the Lewis Locke event, we had the urgent retirement of the former director who'd been in that department for 40 years, Charles Ryan, quit. And our governor appointed another director to come in, and what did they do? What was the first thing that they did? The first thing that this new director did was pull down the iron curtain of opacity, right? And so my question for you, Jimmy, is how difficult is it now for you as a member of the Fourth Estate, as the press, from getting information, from accessing these places, from getting a tour inside the prisons, from going and doing and seeing what you hear on a daily basis?
Well, yeah, I mean, as you know, it's been impossible. I've been asking to take a tour of any prison facility at all in ADC's purview for years, and have been declined. I've asked for his entire tenure to do an interview with Director Shin, and it's never been granted. And then last summer, as we reported, they have drastically reduced my ability to set up phone interviews with incarcerated people, and so now, like the rest of you, I'm using Securus, and one of the downfalls to that is that I know that, and I know that all you know this too, but the administrators, the people who work at Securus or whatever, are reading the emails, because I'll get something on February 3rd that was sent to me January 27th, and the incarcerated person will say, they'll even say in the email, like, hey, if you don't get this for a few days, it's because I'm telling you about this awful COVID outbreak we've had, So, yes, I mean, my interest and my interest in having this conversation with you tonight is, one of it is certainly because something like this would just provide more conduits, not just for the public, but for the press, to learn more about this institution that I'm trying to cover, because I know, and I'm so grateful for all of you out there who have incarcerated loved ones, all of you who were incarcerated when you spoke with me or after you were incarcerated, but I know that you're taking a risk just speaking with me, and I know that people claim that they've lost privileges, bad things have happened to them because they've emailed me on Securus, but they wanted that message to get out. So I know that reality. I know that that's happening, and when I hear something like this is in the works, it makes me think that there is maybe a safer, more sane way for people to just communicate the issues that they're experiencing. It probably shouldn't be. In some ways, it's to my benefit that people that I am a conduit, I am an outlet for them. But in a perfectly functioning system, you wouldn't be writing Jimmy Jenkins at 3 a.m. saying the water's out at your girlfriend's cell. And it's just crazy. So for me, seeing the way the information filters out, it does seem to be a chaotic, haphazard system that I'm only able to do so much with. And so me as a reporter, when I hear about something like this, it excites me, because if there's 10 people on a committee, that's 10 different people who I can say, hey, are you hearing about what's going on at Douglas with the water? So I just think for all of us who are concerned about the prisons and who are trying to find more information, this sounds like a reasonable way to get that information out there in a way that protects incarcerated people, and actually something can be done about their concerns.
And that's all 100% true. And in that, where you talk about your disability now to conduct interviews with inmates, that came in a policy change that was implemented by Director Shin. And in that policy change, he also directly went after staff members. And he told ADC personnel that they can't talk about Department of Corrections issues, whether they're on duty or off duty. So he was trying to limit their speech through this policy change that he implemented in the Department of Corrections. There's no reason to do that. There's no reason to cut off the press and the staff from being able to talk about the incidents in the Department of Corrections if they're running properly. If everything's running great, the thing that they'd want to do is open the windows, doors, and let everybody in. That is the greatest sign that we know that there is total misfeasance, malfeasance, and destruction that's going on in that Department of Corrections. But in that, I want to talk just real briefly about staff too. There are 10,000 plus or minus men and women going to work in the Department of Corrections on a day-to-day basis. And they are just as exposed to some of these environmental safety hazards as the inmates are. They're on the front lines right with the inmates. And the problems that we're having there affect them too. And they're screaming out. As a matter of fact, we've had 3 whistleblowers come out in the last 2 years. And of those 3 staff whistleblowers, all 3 were fired from the Department of Corrections, despite whistleblower protection laws. One of them is deceased. One of them is facing spurious criminal charges. And and what is that doing to other staff members? So when we talk about retaliation and we talk about the psychological operations and all that stuff related just to inmates communicating, they're doing that to the day-to-day hardworking staff that walk in and out of those facilities as well. And so I'm hearing just as much of a want, a need, and a desire for transparency coming from the labor that goes into the Department of Corrections as I'm hearing from the inmates in the Department of Corrections. That alone should be saying something to every taxpayer and every lawmaker in our state.
And so many of those folks too are just, I was just going to say, so many of those people who reach out are just genuinely concerned. They're not disgruntled former employees, they're current employees who really care and love their work and they want it to be better. So,
and putting their lives and career at stake by doing it.
I think we probably just have a few minutes left. So, I just want to say, Sue and John, thank you. I've learned so much from you in this conversation and through our friendship. So I'm just grateful for you and the work you do and all the education you provide to me and the rest of the folks out there. So is there anything you want to say to kind of wrap things up?
Sue, go ahead.
I was just going to tag on what John was saying. I used to drive, when I was driving tram, I worked graves I don't know how long. Anyway, I was taking out a sergeant, and somehow the discussion got on administrative treatment of inmates, and he did pop up, and he said the only difference with the way DOC treats inmates and staff is that we get to go home.
Yeah, it's a true statement. It's truly a true statement, and sometimes they don't. There's a very ironic case about one of the officers calling the local police in one of the rural areas where a prison was and reporting that DOC was kidnapping him by not letting him leave the facility. That happened. So, just to close up, I want to say this. This legislation is enormously important. It's enormously important as we have spelled out today. It is not a panacea. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it absolutely opens the daylight into the Department of Corrections. It gives protected structures in place, or puts them in place, to allow inmates, staff, family members, loved ones, everybody to actually have a vehicle to report these issues, and it's protected. You can report it to the committee, you can report it to the ombuds. We need this structure in place. We have to have this. So we at ATAC and the other organizations that are fighting this FAM START project, we need your help. We need, like I said, boots on the ground, voices on the phones, fingers on the keyboards. We work from donations. We need donations to keep doing this work. We're all doing this for free right now, but we got to keep the lights on. All of these things, we need your help. So please visit our website at aztraco.com and come to our Facebook site. Stay there, comment with us, work with us, talk to us. We need you on this legislation.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the conversation, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank
you
you,
very
Jimmy, so much for everything you do. We appreciate you.
It's my pleasure. Jenkins at KJZZ.org if anybody wants to leak confidential documents. There you go.
much. Awesome, Jimmy. Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you.
All right, and bear with me 1 second. Bearing, and stop streaming, stop.